welcome back to the strangest gig I've ever played. True tales from the studio and the stage. I am your host, Chris J. Norwood. This is the podcast where we hear all the true tales of the strange, weird, wild, wacky, terrible, and or amazing gigs we have to take as freelance musicians. On the podcast with us today is one Chad Stockslager. All around great dude, amazing musician. We had a fun conversation, so let's dive in. Yes, welcome back to the Strangest Gig. I'm your host, Chris J. Norwood. We are back from summer hiatus. I hope you all had an amazing summer. I hope you're staying cool. It is hot. It is August. We've got a long way to go until the heat cools down. So you might as well sit inside and listen to a nice podcast, right? Before we dive in today, I wanted to let y'all know my band Chris J. Norwood and the Knockdown Dragout has a couple of shows coming up here in Dallas that I'm excited about. August 31st, we will be at Three Links, playing with Heart of the City, playing with Jay Isaiah and the Boss Tweed, playing with Nick Parr and the Selfless Lovers. It is going to be a stellar night of rhythm, blues, and soul music. So please get your tickets. threelinksdeepellum.com. I've got a rare solo show opening up for Ryan Montblau at Club Dada in September. And then the big news, Chris J. Norwood and the Knockdown Dragout will be at the historic Longhorn Ballroom December 6th, opening up for Mark Broussard. We can't wait for that one. It's going to be a lot of fun. Be sure to get your tickets for that and come see us in the big room. And as I mentioned today, our guest is one Chad Stockslager. Chad has been one of the go-to keys players in town for a while. He's been part of some amazing bands, most notably the King Bucks, and most recently with the Bastards of Soul. And for the last 10 years, he's been a part of the seminal Dallas Beatles tribute act, Hard Night's Day, which just celebrated their 30th anniversary, if you can believe it. Chad is one of the funniest people I've had the pleasure of getting to meet. I had a really fun conversation with him, and I think you will enjoy it. So without further ado, here is Chad Stockslager. Cool. Well, let's start. Chad Stockslager, thank you so much for coming to my little one-room studio here, for being on the podcast.
Most impressive. I'm quite taken by it.
Thank you very much. We enjoy it here. We have fun.
Mm-hmm.
So let's tell me about your current gig. What do you have going on currently that you're excited about?
Well, I've got currently I'm a full-time player in the Hard Night's Day Beatles tribute act, and we play quite regularly, as you can imagine. There's no shortage of opportunities to sing the old classics from the minstrels of the ancient shrine, and so we plot our wares pretty much anywhere they'll take us, and I've been playing with them now for 10 years. But
who else is in the lineup now?
Well, we've got old Doug Cox on drums, and Bob Cummins Sr. He's those two are kind of the older members. This band celebrated its 30th anniversary just last year, I think.
It's quite a feat.
Yes, and Trey Garrity and Paul Averett. It's a good batch, a good crew.
Good, yeah.
But that's been the bread and butter. But paying the bills and such. But in terms of actual creative, meaningful output, I've been struggling to find a place and a way to put together this sort of variety show thing that I think could be something. Yeah.
I heard you talked a little bit about it when we saw each other the other day. So tell me more. What does it entail?
I don't know. It's funny to even talk about because I mentioned it to my buddy the other day, and he said, maybe if there was a real desire or an interest in this, it would probably already exist. And I thought, that could be true.
Maybe not. There's,
maybe you give your own special twist on it, and
sure,
that somehow elevates the form somehow or does a thing. But no, it came out of the pandemic. I was I should say John Pettigo and I, back in 2012 or something, maybe even before that. We had a little variety show that we did called the JC Experience, John and Chad Experience, and we would put on our little show, and I think the idea was always to have it be like kind of a Mr. Show kind of concept.
Yeah.
You know, you're entertaining the crowd there in the room, but then you're cutting away to pre-recorded bits, and you get singing and dancing and skits and such, and special guests, and we had a good old time with that. That was back at LaGrange before it was Three
wow.
Links.
Yeah.
And so when the pandemic rolled around and there was nothing much to do, I kept seeing all my buddies like setting up a little camera and just being alone in a little sad little corner of their room singing songs for tips. And I thought, man, that's really sad. So like, what if you just had a moving camera and you kind of rolled around from room to room, and now suddenly you could kind of put on a little bit of a show? And we tried that for a bit, and you know, at the time it was pretty successful because, you know, I was just looking to pay my rent, and so for people to chip in through Venmo or whatever it was, you know, and you get to pay the bills, that was pretty good. But out of it came this really fun, creative, you know, experience, and so I'm looking to try to get back into that, try to find some way to make that, you know, profitable or something.
Yeah, just a true variety show.
Yeah, or just, I don't know, like I think the concept itself is wide enough to where it could kind of maybe fit into different avenues. We had this idea for a while there where we were talking about, like, part of what seems to be the case here in Dallas is that there's a lack of sort of centralized focus on the artist and the community in terms of music and really all forms of art. You know, you'll hear about something on KERA, you know, as they're coming out of commercial or something, and you'll be like, "What? Wait, what? Where's that thing? I don't know." You know, and it'll be some great art gallery or something that, you know, that you never hear about again. So I'm sure there are ways to find out, but I just recall a time, you know, long ago where it seemed like everything was a bit more centered. It was easier to look around and say, "Oh, there's this, there's that," and they all felt somewhat connected, even if loosely, you know. Like you think about the old days of like Club Clearview, for example, right? You would go into any given room and it would just be its own special world, you know, and yet they all felt kind of interconnected somehow.
Yeah.
And it was all very natural and organic. I mean, it seems like in the early 90s you would stroll down the streets of Deep Ellum and you'd be slipping and sliding on art and poetry and music, and people, it was like Haight-Ashbury or something. Everyone was busking on the streets. And
right, but it was all one scene.
Yeah, and it wasn't scary, it wasn't weird, you know, and, you know, the streets weren't closed down. You could get around easily, and it was just a real communal sense. So in terms of this variety show, one of the things I thought was interesting was, you know, if you're putting something on, I was doing mine, I think, on Facebook at the time. And of course, they start flagging you right away if you do anything that's copywritten. Sure. Which hadn't even occurred to me. The first episode I did, I think, had Rolling Stones and all sorts of stuff. And so they're sending me all these cease and desists. Like, and so from that point on, I thought, okay, well, I'll just focus on exclusively original stuff. So I would reach out to all these people that I knew. This buddy of mine out in Nashville, I was like, I need like a car chase theme, you know, something kind of funky. And he was like, all right. And then I'd turn to Chris Holt and I'd say, what do you got laying around? Or I'd have someone come in and read, Max Hartman would do a thing for where he would, you know, do some commercial voiceover for some fake ad or something. Yeah. And through that, there was all of a sudden this sort of very communal aspect of all these disparate people who, you know, previously would have worked together in any capacity, suddenly now all kind of working together, and all of these different little elements, so that the credits at the end of the thing would just get longer and longer because these are all like, you know, buddies and connections that you know. And so if you were to take that same concept and maybe broaden it out a bit to where, say, it's like a network, to where, like, you know, back in the day they used to have like public access, right, and so, like, you know, those big towers were a lot to keep up with, and the funding gradually just dwindled away to where it's impossible to do. But now we've come in such a direction with this streaming stuff. You could potentially throw it online and just have like a streaming flow of local content, you see. and you start bringing together all sorts of different folks who otherwise wouldn't have a chance to maybe even know each other. So, like, say, for example, there's this writing hub that's coming out of Oak Cliff right now, out of Wild Detectives.
Yeah.
All these very talented writers are getting published and doing all this great stuff, and most people don't even know about it. But say you went to one of those guys and you said, hey, we're going to take one of your short stories, we're going to have Max Hartman over here read it, and we're going to have these young upstarts over here animate it, and we'll have this young band over here that needs a little exposure. They'll be the soundtrack. And
Yeah.
in that one moment, you've put together like 5 different elements. And
Yeah, that's awesome.
I don't know. I think something like that would be kind of cool. Or like, well, what if Dallas had its own Soul Train, and like we filmed it at the Kessler. You put a funky band up on stage and get 5 cameras on the floor and just get people filming people dancing. I think people would totally tune into that.
I would tune in all the time.
Right. So, like, I don't see why we couldn't do stuff like that. I mean, why don't we? What happened to our, Mr. Peppermint? We need another Mr. Peppermint.
Absolutely.
You go back and look at some of the shows they used to shoot out of, like, North Park. Like, there was a show from 66 to 68, I think, called Something Else. And it was touring bands, like the Monkees would come through and play.
Wow, yeah.
But then it would be tons of local bands, like Kenny and the Casuals and all this. And it was like an American Bandstand type show. And so, like, kids are dancing, you get interviews with the band, you're doing all this stuff. And it would broadcast locally. Now, that's broadcasting on Channel 5 or whatever.
Right.
But say you had it on some
internet,
sort of a thing. Suddenly now, folks in Japan could see what Dallas is all about.
I love that. That's so cool.
Yeah. Well, if I seem a little desperate or insane about it, it's because I have been playing in a Beatle cover band for 10 years, and I'm eager to get back into some sort of creative, renaissance, as it were.
We'll talk about, because you've done Hard Night's Day for a while, but you've also been in quite a few, original acts over the years. And one of the things we've talked about on this podcast with a couple of different people is just the Dallas scene in respects to how people respond to cover bands, tribute bands, whatever you want to call them, versus original acts. And,
right.
And there seems to be a definite, delineation between what a lot of Dallas people would prefer to go see. Have you come across that at all?
Well, I'm fascinated by it. It's an endless discussion with me and my buddies, and I think we were at a gig just not too long ago, and a friend came up and asked me and Paul Averett and was saying, how is it that you guys can do this? You can just sing these Beatles songs all the time. It seems like it would drive you insane. And my friend Paul Averett was saying, well, I need to put a roof over my head. I got to get food in the fridge.
Yeah.
And I kept trying to say, like, well, why is it that's all there is? I mean, we play the first Friday of every month at the Barley House, and the last time we were there, I was looking around in the bathroom and all the different posters, and it's like there's a cover band for every single thing.
Right.
There's an ELO thing coming out. There's a Thin Lizzy. There's this and that, and I'm just like, okay, well, And
I wonder if most people in Dallas realize that's pretty unique to Dallas.
To have that many cover bands.
To have that many different cover bands.
Well, I'm curious. I don't know. I mean, surely, right? I mean, it would seem that way.
So my wife and I were just in New Orleans, and you walk up and down Bourbon Street, and it's mostly cover bands, but it's kind of like the party cover band, right?
Right.
There aren't as many like. I think what makes Dallas unique is there's a tribute band thing that's very specific. Like, you don't see a lot of the, cities that have bands like the Thin White Dukes or, the very kind of specific tribute act.
Yeah, that is curious. So, like, in New Orleans, you would think that there would be a lot of jazz, right?
Ton of jazz, ton of, as you would expect in New Orleans. And, but also I was just struck by what I would just call party band music.
Right. Isn't that what's cool about jazz, though, is that, like, you could play all these standards. You could do whatever you want with all these old tunes that everyone knows, but you're still going to walk away having creatively expressed yourself by playing that solo completely different each time,
Every night, yeah.
But you're right. I guess, like, I remember, I think the last time I was in Nashville, actually, they've got some of these bars that are, 6 stories high, and you go on each floor, and there's a band playing to nobody. And I just remember thinking, wow, this is so strange. Like, I don't know. I don't remember what night of the week it was, but I just remember thinking, like, all these bands are booked to play to an empty room for 6 floors.
Yeah.
I mean, you kept going to see, well, what's this band going to be doing? It was very strange. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think that's part of the whole thing. Like, Dallas seems to have lost some of its artistic identity, maybe, at least musically. I don't know. I mean, I know there's probably lots of great talent that's coming out and doing stuff right now. But I mean, as far as, you know, when the Dallas Observer Awards roll around, it's like it's still whatever St. Vincent's doing, or you know, Norah Jones' new album or something, and it's like Erykah Badu, and it's like, you know, I'm all about celebrating our you know, our legacy.
Absolutely.
But it does seem strange. I don't know. It feels like that's the only way to really make a living. It seems like is to be playing in these cover bands, which is very sad to me. You know, I mean, like, is it a question of the venues that are still available or interested, or is it just like they're catering to what people will come and see? I mean,
yeah, that's the question, I guess.
You know, if, you know, like if you, whenever I was in the King Bucks, we used to play Adairs every Monday night. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was kind of a half and half. We did a lot of originals, but we did mostly covers, I guess. But we never played them like slavishly.
Yeah.
You know.
It wasn't a tribute act.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. We kind of gave
You'd
it
give
our
your
own
own
little
spin. Yeah.
Right. And that was an interesting thing, because I remember people always coming up after the show and being like, you know, I don't really even like country music, but I like you guys. Like, that what you guys are doing is a little different. And I thought that was kind of cool. But like, I don't know. I just, I don't know if you look at what the landscape is. I mean, where do you play? Where can you build up a following with original music? I mean, we used to all play at Muddy Waters and all these weird little joints, and you could just have people come. I mean, the Cavern up, you know, downstairs would have a lot of gigs that we would all play. And, you know, before it was the Twilight Lounge, years before, it was Insomnia, this coffee house down there in Deep Ellum. And they had a big stage in the back, and it was almost like you could just book your own band anywhere you wanted. There was a place across from the Curtain Club called Kokomo Joe's, and we used to play out on the patio. And I mean, it was just like full rock band, you know, and it was a grand old time.
Yeah.
But I don't know. I don't know where you do that now.
My hope is that, you know, it'll kind of come back around. That, you know, that was my hope coming out of COVID, that people would miss the camaraderie of being with other human beings and seeing live music face to face. I hope that comes back around.
Yeah. Yeah, I would think so too. I mean, I don't know. Everyone else seems to have moved on pretty well, but I seem to be still kind of in the fog of that whole experience. I don't quite know what it is, but I remember reading an article during the time, and it was saying how, you know, it's one thing, you miss your family, you miss all your close friends that you'd normally see, but it's these sort of outer rings.
Yeah.
So it's like the guy at the end of the bar whose name you never quite remember, but you always give each other a little nod, you know, and it's like, that's all part of the community as well. And so, yeah, it would be great to see. I mean, with the Soul Band, for example, I felt there was a great opportunity, or it seemed like we were witnessing a real, genuine local support coming through for that.
For sure.
Some of those gigs we played where, I mean, the one we opened up for the Black Pumas, I remember thinking, like, we couldn't even hear ourselves between the songs. Like, I couldn't hear the count off for the next thing because the crowd was just going nuts.
Yeah.
And it was really powerful, and it was, I think it spooked us a little. We were all like, oh my God, like this seems a lot, you know. And again, it's that room, so it just sounds so great.
Absolutely.
But I don't know. I'm hopeful, but I think Chris Holt just put out a solo record. I'm very excited to see what that's all about.
Yeah.
Danny's been working on his stuff. And so I guess, you know, we'll just see what happens.
Tell me about, if you're comfortable, talk to me about the Bastards of Soul. And my question about it, if you're okay talking about it, is to have a band that you're a part of, as you were talking about, that was such a huge hit that, was on the brink of whatever you want to call it, breaking, making it to the next level, to be kind of cut short so tragically. How do you find the kind of strength and creative endurance to kind of press on after going through something like that?
Well, I think that has been part of the challenge in a way. I mean, I think the uniqueness for me with that group was that as you know, we were all writing songs, and it was such a unique thing to write for someone else to sing. I don't think any of us had ever really done that, really, which presents a challenge, but it's also very liberating in a way, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
And so, for me personally, there was a lot of great energy creatively going into that project, and of course, with all those different strong voices in the room, it can be challenging to get it all together. But that was also part of the journey. It was like, wow, we pulled it off. Like, we actually got along long enough to make this thing happen. But it is. It's been tough. I think the mental health situation is what I've been mostly kind of struggling with, because it's like I'm trying to figure out, how many times do you get close enough to something and then just feel it kind of, fall out of your hand before you say, okay, well, what the hell am I doing? Like, maybe I should be working at Arby's. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. So it's a
I
challenge.
struggle with that a lot too. Just how do you get that desire and that will to keep kind of pressing forward?
Well, and going back to what we were saying before, it's like I think that there's one of the challenges is being able to acknowledge how much of your own life's direction is basically your own choice, or how much you're kind of going with the flow, or not even with the flow, but being moved along confidently with like a river of support and like-minded folks, so that whenever you fall into a situation or you record an album or you do a thing, it's like you've got your best friends around you.
Right.
And so like it feels very natural and it feels very organic, and so I think that was part of my challenge, or has been, is that coming out of the shutdown and everything, everyone had kind of moved on and done other stuff and was doing their own thing. And so suddenly you're in a position to where, well, I've got to figure this out on my own, what the hell am I supposed to be doing?
Right.
And, I've always taught music and stuff, but it's like, I don't know. Like I love writing songs. I love collaborating, and sure. I think that was a big lesson for me as well, is realizing how much of the collaborative part of it was important to my process.
I wanted to ask another question about that band specifically, and it was I saw the documentary. It was phenomenal, obviously, and I hope everyone goes to see it. But I wanted to ask, what was Skin Wade's, what was his process like as a producer? What was his role in those sessions? I think
it's safe to say that he was still kind of, maybe to a certain degree, figuring it out. I think he's such a sweetheart and so brilliant at supporting and lifting folks up that I think he was being hypersensitive to everyone's egos and to everyone's persnicketyness. He's really good. He's very diplomatic, so he's very capable of like kind of cooling down a room and making sure everyone is being heard and all that. But I think consequently you can kind of have too many ideas all of a sudden. Sure. And I could see the frustration sometimes in his face, and but super easy to work with. I mean, just a total champ. He's got always running for the best idea, and has just tons of insights and interesting perspectives that we don't really have. I mean, he and I've stayed up for hours on the phone talking at night about his vast knowledge of like hip hop and all this, and that's a kind of a gray spot for me. So like I'm always just fascinated by everything he knows about it.
Does he have a musical background?
I think just. It's my understanding that I don't know that he's ever played an instrument, but he's always been around movers and shakers and artists who are hot and fresh, and him and Luke Sardagna, who's also part of the Eastwood record label, they both go way back into that whole scene, and so it's his knowledge is vast.
Yeah, it seems. Yeah, that comes across in the documentary.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into some of the fun stuff. You've been in a lot of different bands, original bands, cover bands, tribute bands. Tell me now about the strangest gig you've ever played.
Oh, well, I was thinking about that. I think there's a handful of weird ones. We had
and we can hear multiples.
Okay, well, I'll keep them brief, but I think there was one with the King Bucks. We played out in Ennis at this place called the Wooden Nickel. And it was like this weird little honky-tonk, and we didn't realize at the time that it was booked that it was the only bar that stayed open after midnight in town. So once all the other bars closed at midnight, then they all just kind of file into this place. And so, at 12, the place was just suddenly packed with all these other revelers who'd been drinking quite a bit already. And I remember the sound guy was just kind of wandering around on stage. He'd just kind of wander up and check on things, and he seemed very kind of in his own world. But it was a rowdy scene. I mean, people were yelling for AC/DC, and then I think there was an old pregnant lady who was beating on the bathroom door, and she was clearly drunk. I mean, no. It was just it was just a wild scene altogether. But that was definitely one that was pretty weird.
East Texas can produce some strange ones.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, and I mean, it was like I don't know if it really counts as the gig, but we had a deal. It was the last gig before things shut down. Actually, it was in Austin, opening for Kamasi Washington, and
this is Bastards of Soul.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
and it was just that night that we heard on the news that they Italy was closed.
Wow.
And I remember thinking, well, that seems a bit extreme.
Yeah.
And then I think within the hour they were saying that South by Southwest was canceled, and we were like, oh. And
were you all scheduled to play something?
No, we weren't. But I just remember thinking, having lived down there and having played there on that thing before, it was like, that's kind of a huge deal. I mean, people plan their travel, planes, all this stuff. Yeah. And so
I remember some bands being like, because for some that's an amazing opportunity, and to have it kind of taken away.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. That was a pretty crazy situation. We had one of my favorite gigs we ever did was where we got to back up Wanda Jackson at the Kessler one time, and that was quite a hoot.
So what was that like? Did y'all just get a playlist of songs?
We it was I think Jeff Lyles put us in contact with, but I somehow got their landline number for Wanda Jackson and her
King
husband.
Bucks, right? Yeah.
And so I call, this number, and it's just exactly like a phone call in the 80s would have gone. It's two people on either end going, well, I'm going to hang up, you hang up, and so I wind up talking to her husband, and he sent me all the stuff. And
did y'all have charts or?
No charts, just a set list.
Yeah.
And we worked, I think we rehearsed several times to get ready for it. It's rockabilly stuff, so it's lots of hard stops.
Yeah.
And
with her?
No. So she rolls in the day of the thing, and we're going to do a little sound check with her. And of course, half the set gets scrapped. All the keys are different, Well, I don't know, honey. I don't know if I can sing that one. And we're like, oh, okay, all right. Well, we'll put it in E flat, And
Yeah.
it's like, So we're kind of a little frantic trying to get it all together. But my favorite part was just before she left the Kessler to go to her hotel, Jeff Lyles was leaning over saying, okay, Miss Jackson, we're going to have so-and-so come pick you up here, and we'll have you back here by 8 o'clock. Mm-hmm. We'll get the show going. And she just leans over to him and she says, honey, you can't rock and roll before 10 o'clock. And I just thought, that is like the coolest thing I've ever heard. And of course, she comes back and she's all done up and she looks great. And King Bucks had to go out like several times because she was running behind and, just keep the crowd going. Packed house, and she gets on the stage and she just she lets loose this howl, it was like a cat just being, murdered. And the place just exploded. It was such a magical thing. And from that point on, you're just hanging on for dear life,
Yeah, man, that's old school.
Yeah, but it was very cool.
I love that. What about, I had Matt Hillier on, and 1100 Springs was another one of those Adair's bands that played a long time. And those Adair's crowds can get a little rowdy.
Oh, yeah.
Were there any memorable shows from those Adair's shows?
I mean, it was Monday nights, so it was always kind of like beginning of the week, but it was service industry, right? So like all these people who'd been working all weekend had a little loose change, and so they'd come in and the way it works at Adair's is you get a percentage of the bar. So the more people, and the more rowdy they are, the better off you'll do.
Yeah.
And so after a while, those nights just kind of all ran together. And
How long did y'all do that?
It was several years.
Yeah.
And then, but we would do some one-offs. Whenever they would have like an anniversary or like a daytime thing, and those were a little easier to kind of pick apart. But yeah. I mean, if you're not careful, you'll get just a little rowdy yourself. And I seem to recall one gig where I just remember looking down at my hands, and it was like penguin flippers. Like I just could not quite figure out what was going on, and everyone on stage is kind of looking, and I'm like, oh boy, like something's got a little funny. We had one of the things they have at Adair's is a camera that kind of faces the parking lot behind the building there, and for some reason, the feed plays on this television right above the buck hunter game, I think.
Yeah.
And so at all points, I guess if you're behind the bar, you can see what's going on in the parking lot, which is cool. But our guitarist at the time, Keith Kaloran, a very dear old friend, had wandered with some gal out behind the dumpster, unaware that the whole thing was being broadcast inside the bar, and they were smooching and such, and it was quite hilarious. We all had a good laugh at that one.
Well, that's it for me. If you have any other stories, speak now. Otherwise, we talked about your variety show. What is there anything else that Chad has on the horizon that he's looking forward to?
Well, I mean, I'd obviously like to put together another band. I just don't want, you want to be able to pay everybody.
Yeah.
We had a great time a few weeks ago. Put together a group for Bobby Patterson. We played out at the Allen Library there. They've got a real nice little
that's cool
concert hall back there in the back. And I thought that went really well. I'd love to get him playing some more. And
he's great.
Yeah, he's so great. And I fear his legacy is just maybe a little too unknown around these parts. If you go even
Which is a shame, because especially since he's from here.
Yeah, and like I'm constantly learning new stuff about him. And his depth of work and how much he's done in the industry for 50 years. But a fascinating fella, and he's still, I mean, he's had some strokes, he's had some health issues, but once he gets cooking on stage, he's like a little tornado. You can't stop him. Yeah.
I did, I used to do commercial music, and I'd written this track for a McDonald's spot, and it was this James Brown kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
And he came in and sang on that, and it was same kind of, he's kind of meek, and he kind of hobbles in, and then like the red light was on, and he came alive and just let out this scream that was just, man, it was just wild.
And he's got all these raps, I think on the radio maybe, because he hosted that show for so long. I think he came up with a lot of fun little, almost like a Nipsey Russell kind of like rhyming prose, where he'll go off on this rap. Like what was one he said the other night that was so funny? He said, when I die, put chitlins at my feet and put 2 biscuits in my hand because I'm going to sop my way to the promised land. And I was just like, that is so cool. And our saxophone player, Jason Davis, we were driving after the gig, and he was like, yeah, I think he's like one of the first rappers. Like he's coming up with that stuff like way back when.
Yeah.
And I love that. I mean, that's priceless. But like I say, if you go on his Wikipedia page, it's like 2 paragraphs. There's like nothing there. Like we need to get Wolanski in here. We need to like write a book about this guy.
Before it's too late, for
sure.
Yeah,
even if it's just sitting down and getting like an oral history, it would be pretty great. You know, just see, because I think once you start jogging him, he'll remember all that stuff.
Yeah, I bet.
But yeah, I'd love to be a part of something like that. And I'm curious. I'd like to revisit the Longhorn. I know you and I talked about that whenever that was first happening. But I think that was in such a formative stage of their reopening. You know, next thing you know, they're booking Emmylou Harris for 2 nights, and they've got a lot on their plate. But I think the idea of like a, you know, residency out there could be pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And, you know, get some local talent up there and, you know, get them to show off their wares.
I think a true, like, you know, rhythm and blues review that they used to do would be super cool.
Yeah, and the history of that place is so rich.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
We were talking with Bobby, and he was saying that he was with Jack Ruby the night before he shot Oswald.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah, he was like, he swung by his club to try to get some money. He was like, you owe me for this gig. And Jack Ruby used to run the Longhorn, so it's just like, there's all this great history around here. But yeah, we should talk more about this whole streaming thing and see, you know, maybe we can get some stuff together. Everyone I've talked to about it seems really excited. I think there could be an appetite for it.
Absolutely. Yeah, man, count me in.
Yeah.
Count me in.
Well, I'd love to have you on board.
Well, Chad, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This has been a lot of fun. It's really great to get to hang out with you.
Yes, absolutely. Well, thanks for the opportunity.
All right, there he goes, Chad Stockslager. Now, please be sure to go check him out with Hard Night's Day next time they're playing. I believe he said the first Friday of every month at the Barley House. And stay tuned for other great stuff coming from him. Chad's always playing around town. Wonderful player, wonderful human being. Please be sure to support him. As well, if you'd like to come hear my band, Chris J. Norwood and the Knockdown Dragout, remember, August 31st, we will be at 3 Links with several amazing bands. Then September 20th, I'll be solo, opening for Ryan Montblanc. And then the big show, December 6th, at the historic Longhorn Ballroom, opening up for Mark Broussard. Please come see us. Thank you for listening to The Strangest Gig. If you're a musician and would like to be on, give me a shout. And until next time, just remember, a gig's a gig, right?